did the years go so quickly, my love? How did we get to be gray? Decades go by in the blink of an eye. It still feels like just yesterday. The first time that I heard you say, love me forever and hold me right now. Gather our memories like this. I know we'll never be old anytime we run.
If everybody will have their seat, please. Just a few things I wanted to mention before we go on to the next speaker. If you are interested in the caregiver session that's given at Dieter with Peggy for people who are newly diagnosed and their partners, they are on the Dieter table. You can stop and get the information. This is on the Dieter table as well, and this is the caregiver class that Peggy does, the 6-week session. If you want more information on dementia care advocates of the Hill Country, this is on the Dieter Center table, and it's also on the Peterson table. And if you have not gotten a survey already, you can pick up one of these at the Dieter table or the Peterson table. We are sending these out to our community. They've already gone out in the mail. We are asking people to look at this survey to understand what the needs are for this community and understand better. We have been having some planning meetings, but we wanted to do the survey before we began and make sure we're offering the right things that you need. So if you would take one of the surveys, fill it out. It does need to be back into Dieter by March 31st. And also you can pick up support group cards. They are on the Peterson table as well as the Dieter table. And it tells you the times and locations of the support groups. It's my pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Dr. Krisann Muskievicz. Dr. Muskievicz is a medical humanities scholar and a member of the Schreiner University faculty. I don't think I've ever mentioned this to her, but sometimes when my temper flares and I think I shouldn't be thinking these things, or I need to figure out quickly how to readdress this, I think, what would Krisann do? Because she is one of the most compassionate and one of the most calm people I think I've ever met. I've been lucky enough to work with her on the ethics committee at the hospital, and she sets a great example. She received her doctorate from the Institute for the Medical Humanities at the University of Texas Medical Branch in Galveston, Texas. She's a member of the Biomedical Ethics Committee at Peterson Regional Medical Center, and she is the coordinator of the Vesalius Living and Learning Community here at Schreiner, where she mentors first-year students entering the health professions. Her research areas include healthcare ethics and narrative studies in healthcare education. Her primary area of interest is the impact of storytelling in relational healthcare. So, Dr. Muskievicz.
Good afternoon, everyone. Joe Carroll, you have obviously not seen me at home when I'm trying to make dinner and all that good stuff and get everything together in the afternoon, so thank you for that. Oh, I should call you. Oh my Lord, I need all the help I can get. So good afternoon, everyone. I appreciate you being here, and I appreciate you being present for my talk. And I ask you to get a margin ready, because I'm going to ask you at little points to take notes and take little reflection notes for yourself. And I won't call on any of you independently, I promise. But there will be little places where I'll ask you to make a little reflection note for yourself. So as a member of the Schreiner community, I hope that you have been formally welcomed to our campus, and if you have not, then please allow me to welcome you. How proud I am to be a member of the Schreiner community and to have you here. And if it were a nicer day, I would invite you to go for a walk on our beautiful quad, but I'll reserve that invitation for another day. But thank you so much for being here. So my talk today is considerations and strategies for facilitating end-of-life conversations. So one of the main things that I want to talk about is the ethical principle of autonomy. So you probably have heard that word before, but I want to add a layer to that today. Autonomy, we know, is sort of our perception of how we vision our ability to control things for ourselves. But we also know that as we transition toward the end of life and we're working with those who are, that includes a change regarding independence, perceptions of self, and the ability to voice one's own self-interest. So this conversation may turn to be about the person rather than with the person. So the transition in the perception of autonomy is away from potentially what would I want toward what would someone else want for me, or what is the assumption that someone gives when they speak through my voice. And the conversation may include a combination of perceptions about the past and about the present, sort of who has this person been historically to me and for me, and who is that person now. And all of those considerations affect the ways that autonomy is viewed. So the definition of autonomy is that it's the capacity to be one's own person. To live life according to one's own reasons and motives, and have things taken as one's own privilege and not the product of being manipulated or being forced by anyone else. So as Americans, we strongly value autonomy, maybe even more so than some other cultures in the world. So we very strongly value autonomies, and I think that that's among the reasons that we're really compassionate towards what it means to have a change in autonomy. So over time, as autonomy changes, there's also an affiliated question about unity and authenticity, and who are we as we change through time. So there's a tight conceptual connection between your self-governing agency, a person's ability to control and have autonomy for themselves, and that's called synchronic psychic unity. Sort of, there's a difference between who we are at the time and who we are over time, potentially. So there is the concept of thinking of things in this moment. Who am I now? What's important to me now? What do others perceive as important to me now? In the current given conditions, how do I enact my autonomy? And there's also the narrative of unity, the connection between self-governing agency and diachronic unity. So that's over time. So the top one is at this time, and the bottom term is over time. So who are we? Who am I? Who is our loved one? Over time. What is the authenticity of their narrative? Who have they been? Who do we perceive them to be in the whole? Who do I perceive myself to be in the whole? And sort of an analysis of the who am I now and who have I always been helps us conceptualize decision-making and compassion and storytelling in the current moment. So we do have evolutions in autonomy. So an evolution is a movement or a change of position, a change in behavior or attitude, a wheeling, twisting, or turning movement. Think of this in context of diagnosis. How does a diagnosis cause a movement or change of position? And this is one of those times I'll ask you to make a margin note. Think of an evolution. How can a diagnosis cause a movement or a change in a position? If I received a diagnosis, who am I now? Who have I been over time? And how does authenticity inform that? An evolution includes a change in behavior or attitude. How does Alzheimer's cause that for the patient, for the caregiver? So think of that as an evolution and maybe make a margin note on that. The next one might involve maybe some swirling drawing or some words that are kind of wrapped around each other. How can the Alzheimer's disease process be imagined as a wheeling, twisting, turning movement? Neurologically, physically, emotionally, familially, organizationally. What twists and turns are part of that evolution? So there's a transition. There's a transition in personhood. So we have that authenticity of who we've always been and who we are now. And sometimes that can feel disjointed because there is a transition away from my previous capabilities, my previous abilities, my previous thoughts, wishes, aspirations, as it's different in the face of diagnosis. That's also true for caregivers. Caregivers who are alongside that diagnosis potentially also have those similar changes to consider as well. So attitudes, needs, and current relationships may change. That doesn't mean that the level of love changes, but the inaction of love may change. Or that doesn't mean that a person is free from frustration because they enact love, or that they will feel frustration because they enact love. It's unique. But personal history and others' memories and previous versions of relationships will exist in a sort of remembrance, because at that moment of diagnosis, there is a shift, there is an evolution, and there is a change. So there becomes that cleave of what was and what is. Who we were and who we are distinctions that are accentuated for everyone involved. So more margin notes. I'm going to click through these slides and then I'm going to click back. Okay. I'm going to ask you to think of an earlier version of yourself, a later version of yourself, and a future version of yourself. I'm going to show you a picture. If you can see it, that's me in my Bears sweatshirt, because if you can't tell that I didn't grow up here from my accent, I'll tell you that I grew up in Chicago. That's me in my little Bears shirt. I'm 6 years old, and I am standing in the back of the Ford pickup truck, my grandma's truck. I'm leaning on my grandmother, Christina. She's wearing one of her outfits that she ordered from the Blair catalog. I don't know if anyone in the room remembers Blair. Everything she wore, she got from the Blair catalog, and there she is sporting that. And that's my mom. My mom's about the age that I am now. And she's wearing her Minnetonka moccasins. She got a new pair of Minnetonka moccasins at the beginning of every summer. And that's us in Wisconsin at the summer farm, pulling some tomatoes into some baskets. I still have some of those baskets on my back porch. So that's me as I think of myself as a previous self, a version of my current self, potentially, and a future self. So I'm going to click back. Bless you back there. You probably have an iconic photo, that you kind of think of in relationship to your family, okay? So what I'd like you to do is conceptualize an earlier version of yourself. You don't have to go all the way back as far as I did, but you might. Think of an earlier version of yourself and make some margin notes, please. Pick an age. What was important? What is important at that age? What are your goals at that age? Who's in your life? What are your hopes? What are your fears? And what do you have control over? So pick an age, previous version of yourself, and make some notes on that, please. And I'm going to just pause back a second and give you some intentional time to do that. take the same questions, please, and apply them to a later version of yourself. It could be your current version of yourself, maybe something that's just, a small lapse subsequent to the previous place you were working with, but please pick a different point in your life. What's important? What are your goals at that moment in your life? Who's in your life at that moment? What are your hopes at that moment? What are your fears at that moment? And in that moment, what do you or did you have control over? Noticing a few differences. Some are the same, some are different, some are the same. Okay, so you can probably predict the next step I'm going to request from you, to envision a future version of yourself. Now, it could be that you're imagining the sporty, active, older person who is still skiing and really still very, very out there. It could be that you are willing to go into a space where you're kind of engaging your moral imagination of what if I'm not that? And to engage that moment, potentially. But what will still probably be important? What might your goals still be? What will your hope still be in your life, probably? What do you think you will still have a hesitation or a fear toward, potentially? And what might still you have control over? I was standing on the back of this pickup truck, I was probably really excited that I got to ramble around in the back of the pickup truck with no seatbelts on and kind of bounce around in the back by the farm. And I was probably pretty psyched to be out with my mom and my grandmother. The three of us had sort of this, tri-generational power, the three of us. We just were really a tight-knit unit. I was probably pretty psyched about that. I probably didn't ever think that my mom was going to get old. At that moment, I probably didn't ever think that my grandmother was going to be gone. At that moment, I probably didn't ever think that I was going to be an only child with a 4-month-old baby when my mother passed away from small cell lung cancer. But I was that little kid in those little pigtails. And my mom, sitting on the back of that pickup truck, glaring at my grandfather, who always had a Polaroid camera when he wasn't riding around on a motorcycle like a crazy person. She probably wasn't thinking that she was going to become the primary caregiver for both her husband and her mother in her house when her only child had moved to Texas, and that she would be taking care of all that on her own. At that moment, I don't think she thought that. And my grandmother was probably ready to lodge one of those tomatoes at my grandfather, because those two bickered like you would not believe. But I think she knew that their time was precious. So I think that she knew some things about life that maybe the other two of us didn't. So as you are looking at the things that you notice about the different points of your life that you have written down for yourself, if you are working with that family member who won't talk, doesn't want to talk, isn't ready to talk, they might be willing to talk about a picture. Or they might be willing to talk about who were you, or who was your dad, or who was your mom, or who was your sister. Who are they now? And what do you think that they will want for the future? It might be potential that you can take this exercise that you've just gone through and you'll be able to say, you know, I've done this myself. And you can engage them in a conversation that has some warm memories, some truth and reality, and a transition towards, okay, things are changing. You've experienced change before and you're experiencing change now. And everyone involved is going to continue to experience change through the remainder of this situation. And you've gone through that process. So I hope to have modeled for you one way to bring that conversation to them, maybe in a way that they don't necessarily know it's coming. Maybe it's not, hey, sit down, we're going to have this really hard conversation. But bring me a picture, or show me a picture, or who's in that picture, or tell me about when you, or when she, or when he. And then talk potentially about the different stages as a progression of awareness that change is already underway and is yet afoot. So that's one way to frame a conversation. Another way, and thank you for going along with me on that, thank you for that. Another way is to bring about an intentional conversation. And this might be for someone who realizes that a change in their life is coming. Maybe they are early stage diagnosis and they are still able to be cognizant in a strong and familiar way, yet they know that change is coming. And it may be that they need to or want to or are going to introduce a very purposeful conversation. And that would be the, hey, we're going to have this conversation and it's going to be tough, but I love you and I want to talk to you. And this is a framework for maybe taking that tact. So one thing that we know is that the right time may never arise spontaneously. So there may be a context for very deliberately engaging a conversation that doesn't seem like it's going to just happen by itself. If there are relatives that we see once a year or twice a year, even once a month or once a week, it may be that the conversation might never come up spontaneously and it needs to be introduced on purpose. In that case, if we can talk about things that are hypothetical, that the someday, that may be a more comfortable space in which to frame a conversation. But sometimes for folks who have reached a diagnosis, that someday is a little bit more fuzzy and they need to speak about realities. So to take it as a gift, the perception of a gift, I offer you a gift when I express my feelings and my wishes. That is one way to bring this to the fore, to help families understand that this conversation is not for the intention of pain or hurt or air in the laundry or getting in an argument or bringing out the Kleenex box on purpose, but it's to have a sharing of love. That sometimes that motivation can be the impetus to say, okay, we'll talk about this. If it's for love, then we'll talk about this. And you know this, that friends and family will appreciate certainty in contemplating decisions for other people, that if they are able to know based on who they've been and who they are now, I feel certain that this is an ethical decision, that this is something that they would feel good about, that level of certainty is truly a gift. Many concerns and worries can be avoided through conversation. Sometimes we think that conversation is just going to make things worse, and sometimes in those uncomfortable moments it feels kind of worse. I acknowledge that. Been there with you on that, but that the conversation on the other side of that reveals a certainty and a love and a comfort and an assurance that does make that worth it, I believe. So a way to talk about that, I'll give you another framework. is things that I need you to know, and I welcome you to make some margin notes on this as well. Think in terms of, okay, these are things, if I'm having this conversation about you because I know that a big transition is coming, these are things I need you to know about me. I need you to know my spiritual and religious stance. I need you to know my hopes. I need you to know my fears. I need you to know my yes list, my no list, and my love. And we'll work through each of these. Firstly, this is something that may transition over time. It may be that a person in the earlier version of themselves did or did not consider themselves to be a religious or spiritual person, but that has changed. It would be important for those that are in a caregiving position to know this, to understand this. Where do I stand on that right now? Over time, and who I am today. If there is a clergy person in my life, do I have a question for that person? Would it be helpful to bring that person into a conversation, either this conversation or a different one, that could inform or listen or just be present? Does the person feel settled? I put settled in quotation marks because that could be different for everybody. Settled for one person could be something very different for another person. But using an ambiguous term like, do you feel settled, could open up a wide space for conversation. It would be important to understand, too, if a person's spiritual, religious stance informs their medical decision-making. Different religions have different viewpoints on different modalities and levels of intervention, and a person could take a comforting level of definition from their spiritual or religious stance, so that could be one avenue for discussion. And I'll ask this about every question in this framework. Do other people know this about you? It's definitely important for us to reflect on these items for ourselves, but do other people know this? Has this been conveyed explicitly? Do others know this? Another thing for the person under consideration is, what do you envision for your life? How do you hope you will be cared for? That might involve specific people. That might involve the exclusion of specific people. And we kind of giggle about that, and I say that with kind of a half-cocked smile on my face, but we know this. Yes, there are sometimes people that we definitely want there, and people that we know do not comfort us. And that is a valid part of the conversation to be invited. And sometimes people feel kind of hesitant, like, I don't know if there's space for me to say that I don't want person X, Y, or Z, but if invited to say, well, I might go ahead and tell you. So there's a space for that question of who do you hope will and will not participate with you in this process. The question of how you hope others will feel, I think, is very important. Because I know in my heart of hearts that when my mother was sick and her chemo brain was really affecting her interactions with me, I knew that she didn't want me to feel afraid or confused. I knew that when I asked her, Mom, what should we be doing about this? How can I help you? And when she said, as serious as can be, well then go ahead and just put me in jail. I knew what she meant was that she had gone through the situation of being a caregiver for both her husband, my dad, and her mother, my grandmother, at the same time. And that when the decision came to transfer my grandmother to a nursing home, that my mom felt like she was putting her mom in jail. So when she said to me, go ahead and put me in jail, I knew what she meant. But we did not have the kinds of conversations that we probably could have or should have. So I know that she would have not wanted me to feel confused in that moment, or angry, or taken aback, or sad. And that had we had conversations to anticipate that sort of comment, I know that we would have both felt better had we addressed that beforehand. What do you hope that others will do? And do others know this? Of course, again, the self-reflection is super important, but the conveyance and the sharing is even more so. And those fears, and this is a hard place to have a conversation, but I do think that it is important. What do you hope will not happen? This can be something as specific as, I don't want people coming and going at all hours of the night, or I don't want loud music, or I don't want people rubbing my feet. I don't like it when people touch my feet. Please don't think that someone is going to comfort me by rubbing my feet. I don't like having my feet touched. So it could be those small, tiny details, or it could be, I really am afraid about going into a nursing facility and being able to discuss that. I mean, so we can talk about tiny, tiny details, or it could be something much larger that can then open a conversation of, well, if I'm unable to do what I think is best for you, then what? So we can have a conversation about hypotheticals and then next. What do you want others to avoid doing or saying? It could be that a person might say, you know, no matter how far gone you think I am, please don't talk about that time when this happened in front of me, even if you think I won't get it. Please don't talk about it. We all might have those little bits and wounds that we want to make sure don't come up. Are you afraid? And that could be yes and that could be no. I don't know if you guys were watching the other night when Tim McGraw sang Glenn Campbell's song. You won't remember you? There's permission in not being afraid. And there's permission in being afraid. What would you offer for comfort? What would you like to receive as comfort? And do others know this? Always do others know this. The yes list, the things that you want to affirm as yes, a positive. If offered yes, or if offered this, would you say yes? And these can be very specific modalities. If you are offered a ventilator, would you say yes? If you're offered antibiotics, would you say yes? If you're offered assisted living as a more appropriate place for you to have a safe daily experience, would you say yes? If you were to go live with your sister, would you say yes? Maybe yes, maybe no. Okay? So, and it could be that that sister really thinks that she's doing a great job because that person wants to do right. But that person might have that on their no list. Let's talk about that. Yeah. So who knows these? Who can say yes for you? You may want to designate or ask or invite your family member to designate a very specific person to say yes. And that would be documented. No one can anticipate every possibility, but talk about some possibilities. The hypotheticals that can roll out of this, we can never anticipate. Are there some things that you want to be sure that take place? My mom really wanted Stand Me Up at the Jukebox by Alan Jackson played at her funeral. So we did some Alan Jackson lyrics, you know. So there can be things that seem lighthearted. There can be things that are really serious and really pivotal and anchoring. And I don't know what that is. You don't know what that is, probably until you start talking about it. So I'll ask you again, do others know this? And there's that no list, and people often get very empowered with the no list. You know, I do not want that to happen. And there's sometimes some real clarity in this no list moment. I want to make sure that this doesn't happen. And it could be that's a moment for saying, well, there's a potential that might happen because of this, and can we talk about that? Who can say no for you? It could be that the context of this question is, okay, well, in order to say yes for me, I might want my husband. But in order to say no for me, that's my best friend Christine because she's not messing. And it might be that we have two different people that might be aligned for someone that can take voice for us. And that would be an important conversation, especially for those two people to have. So it might be that the circle widens. We can't anticipate every possibility, voice any definite no's, allow that empowerment, and of course, do others know this? So thinking long term is sometimes one of those things that we see in the rear view. You know, I wish I had, thought about this so many years ago or whatever. But if you can pause with the family or with yourselves to be in that moment of, okay, long term from now, what might I see in that rear view? Are there any grantings of permission that would be important? Is there timing that would be important? Choices that would be important? Under the context of what would you like to have happen, and do others know this for you? So there's autonomy over time. There's that who we are in the moment, who our family member is in the moment, who our friend is in the moment, as well as that diachronic unity that is that consistent narrative that exists over time. And those can coexist in authenticity, but we're challenged to try to reconcile the person who is right now and the person who has been over time, and what that means for us in terms of making compassionate and ethical decisions with and for someone. All of this, I believe, is framed in love. I want to talk to you because I love you and I know that you love me. I want you to feel certain that you are doing the right thing. That goes both for the patient and the caregiver. I don't want you to be scared. That's for the patient and for the caregiver. I love you for the patient, the caregiver. And especially with the I love you, do others know this? So that's all I have for today. I hope I have given you at least 2 frameworks for having a conversations with people where you're taking everything from today, all the knowledge that you have for today, and maybe 2 concrete ways of engaging in a conversation that I hope will be a nurturing for peace between and among everyone involved in your situations. Thank you.
We have a question.
Please, sir.
Are you familiar with 5 wishes? And if you are, can you tell me why this awesome tool is not approved in Texas? Do you know why?
I don't know why. I know that 5 Wishes has some copyright, sit in each locality, and each municipality kind of has their own ways of doing things. It may be that certain institutions or groups such as this one today might endorse a program such as 5 Wishes, but you're absolutely correct in that it's not been a statewide initiative, but it's a great resource. Yeah.
I was told, I had called some legislators about that, and they did say that at the time it was brought through, that it was also tagged with right to life, and it kind of got mixed up and all of that. So I think the timing, I don't know if it's gone back.
The verified wishes, what they offer on the website.
But it's not legal in Texas, so.
That's a good question. Thank you.
Do we have any other questions? Okay. All right. More questions?
Thank you.
So much. Before you go,
Krisann, I thank you so much for taking your time, and we'd like to do this.
Thank you, everyone.
also you should do like an audiobook because you have a very soothing voice. Okay, before we do closing remarks, let's do some gifts. What do you guys think? Yeah? Okay.
Yeah. Have a beautiful time on this Trinity of Comfort.
Okay, and the winner is Jeffrey Tischler.
One more. And our last beautiful gift, courtesy of Alamo Hospice.
Sharon Hay. Sharon? There she is. Hey. Okay, and that was our last gift, fortunately. Okay, so for those who are seeking continuing education credits, go ahead and put your forms on the black piano right here. Go ahead and put your statement of attendance forms and your student profile forms there. Just put them together, it doesn't matter, I'll sort them out later. And of course you have the cover sheet, so go ahead and keep that. In case you have any questions, go ahead and contact me as you wish. Have a safe drive home. Thank you so much for attending. And here's Jenny for a short announcement.
And the 2 pieces of paper that the Alzheimer's Association would love to have back from you is the education sign-in sheet that's in there, as well as the survey. The survey's confidential. We won't know who said what, but we would absolutely love to have your feedback about today's conference. Thank you all very much for spending your day here. It does look very nice outside, so please be safe going home, and thank you all very much.
So quickly. How did we get to be? Decades go by in the blink of an eye. It still feels like just the first time that I heard you say, love me forever and hold me right now. Gather our memories like this. I know we'll never be old anyhow. Anytime we reminisce, I'll be as young as your kiss. Really just children when we fell in love, and we're still as happy today. The circle keeps turning around like it does. Our children have children these days. I love watching you, watching them